The sponsors who supported the channel get into the next video. Hello everyone, my little lovers of anonymity. After my video about hating Microsoft and its Windows operating system, I was often asked questions about which distribution to choose, which operating system I have, or in general what should I give preference to, Linux or BES systems. Often in the chat, there are still questions about how to configure certain programs in Linux, how to install the same games and the like. So, the first thing to understand, namely for beginners in this topic, Linux is primarily a kernel. The core of the operating system, which for the most part you will not even see in the course of your activity. Everything else, software suites, desktop environment, all these visual things bundled with the Linux kernel, make up the distribution kit. There are a whole bunch of distributives, and they appear almost every day. Almost anyone can write their Linux distribution kit. All this visual component in Linux is mostly customized, configured, and redone at your request. There is no such thing as in Windows, a 7 with such a start button, a 10 with such. Linux is freedom from all these imposed things. The same Arch Linux will be able to look like this, or even like this. You are free to do with the system what you like, and no one has the right to forbid you something. Now there will be a moment that is important to explain, in particular to beginners, and those who do not really understand what, how, why, where and why. I have already told you that the code can be open and closed, and that many programs that use closed code can track your actions, send reports, and make it easier to do bad actions that you will not like. And Linux distributions themselves, not all, but many may contain programs or packages with closed code. Many programs that you want to install on Linux may also contain private code. The same games, not all of course, but many, can somehow track you. Some software can make its own changes to the system, which will reduce your anonymity and confidentiality. Therefore, not all Linux distributions are clean, ethical, and confidential. Of course, there are those who will say that he does not care that he is being watched and so on, he wants to play games, use non-free software. For such, there are distributions like Ubuntu or Linux Mint. There you can install the same GA5, Steam, such a thing as Vine, to run Windows programs inside Linux. However, it is increasingly difficult for me to have a constructive dialogue with such people, because it just so happens that the topic of my channel is getting closer to anonymity and confidentiality, and programs with proprietary codes do not contribute to these goals. Many will not understand this point, but it is still very important. I do not position Linux as a replacement for Windows. Linux is a different system in principle, with a different philosophy. Anyway, I want to be a popularizer of free systems, open source code, freedom and independence, without tracking by third parties. And therefore, I would not recommend using distributors like Ubuntu or Linux Mint, just as I would not recommend using proprietary closed software. In my videos, I often mention the activities of Richard Stallman, the founding father of the GNU Project and the Free Software Foundation, a supporter of open source and freedom. And these guys have compiled their own list of recommended distributions, which you can see now on the screen. And in particular, in my Telegram there will be a link to this list, which I also advised you to familiarize yourself with. Perhaps many will choose something for themselves from this list. The guys from the GNU Project also do not recommend that you use popular and possibly very convenient operating systems, like the same at Ubuntu. In particular, the same Richard Stallman specially recorded a video in which he tells his riot. I will also leave a link to this material. In particular, that video talked about the moment when the company canonicalized that it was a developer at Ubuntu and introduced telemetry tracking into its products. Yes, it could have been disabled in my opinion, but by default it was enabled. Ubuntu is not initially planned as a free distribution, and as for me, Linux is going the wrong way for Ubuntu. but it's not in my rules to judge someone for their actions. So, let's go back to the list of distributions recommended by the GNU project. Note, there is no Debian, there is no Tails, there is no Kodachi, there is no Cubs. And I'll explain why now. There are a lot of programs in Linux. I would even say most of the programs are installed from the distribution repository. A repository is a catalog of programs for distribution. Probably the most understandable comparison will be with Google Play Store for Android. Not quite the right comparison, but it will do for a general understanding. The bottom line is that each distribution has its own repository, where programs are entered, and people using this distribution can install them. It's all done very simply, literally in one command in the terminal. The GNU project requires only free code and programs from distributors. And Bent also does not recommend Linux operating systems, in whose repositories there are not free proprietary programs. Here, for example, is the same Debian, by default, an absolutely clean, free operating system, and it has several branches and repositories, one of which uses only the open source of the program. The second one is marked non-free, which means not free. And because of this, the GNU project does not include it in its list. Whether you pay attention to it is up to you. As for systems honed for anonymity, like Tail, Skodachi, Subgraph, Mofo, there are actually a lot of them, and it takes a long time to list them. So, not all of them are truly open and free. They just have a specialization, a profile, in view of which they have a certain set of programs, functions, and some features. No one prevents you from taking the same Debian and making Tails out of it or something else. Yes, it's long, tedious, and difficult, but if you want to be sure that something should be done well, then do it yourself. Perhaps because of this, I am leading a group channel in Telegram one. I would also like to say about the assemblies of distributors whose direction is POTUS. No one prevents you from taking and installing the same programs under another distribution. In particular, the internet is full of guides on how to make a black arch from Arch or how to screw a Kali Linux toolkit into a Debian. I would also like to expand somewhat on the theme of the desktop environment. After all, often the first thing we see when we log into Linux is the desktop and its environment. All these beautiful or ugly panels. Everything is very individual here. Someone wants his desktop to be like a spaceship, and someone is a supporter of minimalism and believes that there should be nothing superfluous. Both have a place to be. And the beauty of Linux is that you can install what you like, put that theme, and those icons that are nicer to you. For example, I am closer to the X of the FE, or the manager of the open box in general. But, even the same open box can look like this, or maybe like this. And if there is a response, I will somehow show you how to make, in my opinion, a beautiful Linux operating system. Each environment eats the same RAM differently, and it has different requirements for the skills of the person who uses it. Also, for example, the same open box eats pennies, but it requires a certain skill in its settings. And some deed is simply customized. By default, it inspires beauty to everyone, but it eats a lot of RAM. It is also worth saying about the hardware. Installing Linux, most will have some problems with drivers, especially on Wi-Fi adapters, network cards, video cards. Not everyone, of course, but they can arise. The thing is that there are quite a lot of hardware manufacturers, and for the most part, they do not disclose the code of their drivers, and are focused on those who use Windows systems. Therefore, using clean operating systems, you may not have a free driver for the same Wi-Fi module. And because of this, there are already two ways, either to look for and install proprietary closed drivers, or to change the equipment. Of course, there is also an option to write the driver yourself, but I understand perfectly well that this is unrealistic for most. Summing up, I would like to say that I did not poke into any one distribution in this video, and did not tell you that this is a good point. There are always many factors that depend on you, on your needs, knowledge and feelings. Linux is freedom. Freedom to choose what you and only you like, what you consider individual, beautiful, convenient. No one has the right to tell you something or forbid you. The same applies to my channel. I only show tools, methods and algorithms. And whether to use them or not is up to you. Numerous issues, in particular, the frequency of releases of various distributions. The difference between BEES systems from linear, server operating systems. I still have to tell you for those who like to write in the comments that I did not mention this or that. Guys, I appreciate your opinion, a little patience, and everything will be on the channel. As for me, and what system I use, I have an average laptop, and I don't use hardware-demanding systems. I periodically change them once, 2 or 3 months, and set everything up again. I just like the process itself. And I use virtual machines a lot. I have a large collection with various distributions for different purposes, which are used only inside virtual machines. And yes, it's also worth saying that a virtual machine is not always a guarantee of security. So you shouldn't run everything inside a virtual machine. I think that your household, the system will not be affected. In the end, I would like to thank those guys who supported me through the Danishi service on Lurs, even if the amounts are small. But I am very grateful to you for your support. At the moment this is the only source of income. And of course it's worth thanking everyone who supported my channel with a like, writes comments, and tells their friends and acquaintances about my work. There are already 20,000 of you on the channel, and I never thought that you would have so many. So thank you all. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for watching to the end.